This is the Chicks of FinTwit, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook. Join me as I highlight female trailblazers and their male allies across the industry as each shares their expertise on a variety of finance topics. Nothing is off limits. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode.
All opinions expressed by Caitlin Cook and the Chicks of FinTwit podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the host or any of their affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only, is not investment advice, and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending any securities, nor is this an offer or sale of a security.
Hello, and welcome to the Chicks of FinTwit podcast, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, otherwise known as Dead Kate Bounce on Twitter. We are back from a bit of a break, mental health break, if you will. Just needed some time, but we are back and better than ever. Great guest today. Really excited to have another member of the Onramp Invest team on today, Senior Product Manager, Ashton Chaffee. Ashton, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. This is my first podcast. So hopefully not too much of a learning curve, but we talk all the time. So I'm sure it'll be wonderful.
We do. Yeah, no, we do. I bug you all day, every day. So, and the nice thing with these podcasts is I try to keep it super, super light too. And anything overly scripted just gets too confusing. So no, you'll be great. But super excited to have you on again. So tons of great talent on the Onramp team, tons of women. I want to interview all of them if I can. So we're on number 2 here today. And I guess maybe we just start out with a bit on your background, because you do work for Onramp now and we work together, but you do have a super interesting background in startup land as well. So maybe just walk us through, where you started and how you got here today, first off.
Yeah, for sure. So I know this is the Chicks of FinTwit podcast. This is actually my first role in anything related to finance, crypto, anything like that. So my background is traditionally in enterprise SaaS startups. And it's kind of funny how I got there, because I never ever thought about tech as a job path. I never thought about product management as a job path because I didn't even know it existed. My plan when I was in college was to work on the business side of a life sciences company, because Indiana has a huge life sciences presence. But there was this organization in Indiana called the Orr Fellowship, and their whole thing was putting recent college graduates, matching them up with a high growth company in Indianapolis, A, to reduce brain drain, and B, to kind of foster the next generation of business leaders in Indy. So I was part of that program and was matched with a company that I was the first hire outside of the 2 people that owned it. And it was a startup studio. And so we invested pre-seed capital into first-time founders that were in really specific kind of underserved markets, which if you could just keep narrowing down what we focused on, that's 5 different qualifiers for how we even looked at anything. But it was super small amounts of capital plus our time. We would partner with them directly to help them start their business, to figure out what their product was and get it to the MVP stage so that they could then go out for a seed round of investment, kind of another round of angel investment, or getting it out to customers for beta testing. So that was really kind of my intro to what working at startups really even was. And it so opened my eyes to all of the possibilities out there, because I had a really narrow vision of what business was and what people did for their jobs. And I got to this place and I'm like, we're just experimenting and making things up and creating stuff. And there's literally a job for everyone, from things you would never think of. Perfect example, their main product was breadings and seasonings for deli fried chicken. So if you think of I don't know what grocers everybody has, but if you think of going to Kroger and buying fried chicken, we would supply that breading.
Man.
So they brought in money from that. And then we invested and experimented on the side with tech applications. So that was kind of a foundational experience for what does it mean to start a business? What are all of the different things that either a single founder or a small group of co-founders have to do to get something up and running. What does it mean to think about your product and how it solves a problem? What does it mean to try and find product market fit? What does it mean to go through raising capital, both from the investment side as well as from the startup side or the founder side? And then what does launching a product look like? So I got to do that for 5-ish years, including starting our own company as part of that process. So that was kind of like the thing that gave me the startup bug. And then, I moved on to a little bit of a higher application of that, moved to a company that was in the SaaS management space and was really my first product management titled role. I had been doing all of the things a product manager does before, but still didn't even know about that job, didn't have that title. Went to this other company, was there for almost 4 years building a platform to help enterprise companies manage their SaaS spend. And then after that, decided to try out product marketing for a little bit, and went to a company that was in the DevOps for Salesforce space. And so really focused more on kind of pitching, value prop creation, content creation, and how marketing can work with the product team to get the word about the product out there. And then I had this moment where I was like, product marketing is great, but it's not what I love. I want to get back to building. And the next time that I make a jump, I want it to be into an industry where I'm interested in it personally, not tech for tech's sake, as I like to call the past ones. They were great companies, but it was, tech for tech. And so I was kind of like, I want to do something where I can see the end result, where I want to actually learn about the thing that I'm building, because I'm interested in it, not just because it's my job. And so I had a friend, Justin Caselli, who I don't know if he's been on here before, but he is at Onramp. And I CrossFitted with him for like 5 or 6 years. And so he started telling me about what you guys were building. And I was like, this is perfect. Tell me when some product roles are open, because I want to be more in the crypto space, because that's something that I'm learning about on the side anyways. And I'd like to have a job where the personal application makes sense. It's not just work. So yeah, that's kind of my background and how I got into finance/crypto, but the tech side of it.
I love it. And the rest is history, folks. So I will say, honestly, and I don't say this lightly, right? Because everyone at OnRamp is fantastic. Like, we have a great team of people, just elite, as Tyrone always says. And Ashton, probably for me personally, was like the most impactful hire we had, because when we started OnRamp Academy, it was definitely a little bit more on the side, off on my little island, creating content, working with some partners, trying to put pieces together. And Ashton just came through and turned it into something that was actually an experience, turned it into a product that was nice to look at. And we're building a lot of really cool things since. So everything that I was very unsuccessful at is like right within her skill set. So it's like the perfect match there. So super, super grateful to her for being on the team. But I guess there's so much I want to ask about there, but going back to the place that you started, I'm like very envious of the fact that you started in sort of like this little like startup hub, really, where you worked with different companies and helped them directly. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of lessons that you learned from that, starting out. Like, what are the biggest takeaways that you had from that? Because I'm sure you saw everything across the spectrum, from what to do right, what to do wrong, the ones that succeeded versus the ones that didn't, and everything in between. So just curious for any of your biggest takeaways there.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaways, I'll say 3, and I'll say them first, and then we can explain them. So if you can help me remember the ones that I say, that'd be lovely.
Write it down.
So the first one kind of goes back to what I said originally, is you can literally do anything, right? Like, if you have an opportunity that you want to go after, I don't think that college or society really teaches this enough when we think about professions and what we're going to spend the rest of our life doing. But go after the thing that you want to build. Like, you can build the company or the role that's perfect for you. And we can talk about that more in a second. The second one is being a founder especially a first-time founder, is really, really hard. Finding product market fit is really, really hard, and raising money is really, really hard. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but the stats that are out there of, most startups failing and most startups not getting past a certain round of a raise, like there's a reason for that. It is tough. It's tough mentally. It's tough, kind of endurance wise. It's tough financially. There's a reason why it's hard. And there's a reason why the people who make it kind of look back and say like, whoa, that was a crazy ride. And then the third one is, it is all about timing. You can have the best idea. You can have the most relevant idea. You can execute on that idea. But if the timing is not right and the market's not ready, it doesn't matter, which is so sad. But I can tell you how I've lived that 27 times. That's probably the one that needs the most explanation, because I think, whatever I said about number one in terms of going out and making something happen, that's pretty straightforward, right? Like, who would have ever thought that you can have an entire multi-million-dollar business based off of breadings and seasonings for fried chicken in the grocery deli? Like, even at just independent grocers, like you never think about something that specific, but these guys, like, it was kind of a family business, and then they got into it, and then they grew it, and then they expanded, and then they made a private label, and then all this kind of stuff, where they just never think about this stuff, but there is a market for it. So, if there's an opportunity, go out and seize it and make it happen. The point about this side of the business being really hard, getting things up and running, there are so many nuances to business, and, there's a reason why big companies are big, right? You have a lot of specialization. You have different people focusing on different things so that everybody can execute on their line of business and focus on, growing the company in multiple ways. And when you are starting something out and it's either just you or you and a small team, A, you have to do everything. And B, you only have limited capacity. So that means that you have enough money to give yourself enough time to build the thing and make an impact with it. And so candidly, one of the reasons why I left that first company, the detail is when I said we started our own company. As part of that, I actually, so everything was kind of like intermingled because we were working on a lot of projects at once. So when I left one of them, I left all of them. But the business that we started, we ran for about 18 months to 2 years. And we kind of got to the point where it was like, well, we need to raise more capital to keep going, to make an impact. And, I was like, well, how much are we trying to raise? And for this amount that we raised, I don't think we'll be able to get to where we need to be to make this a feasible company. Therefore, I personally do not feel like it's right to take on money, because like that, I'm not confident that we'll get returns for the investors at that point. And like, are we going to keep raising, or do you not want to, kind of what's the situation there? So for me, it was a question of, can we make the impact? We've been trying this for 2 years. What needs to change so that we can, make it into what we want it to be? And for me, it wasn't worth it. So I stepped away. And then the third thing, which was timing. So when at any given time, I was probably working on 6 different companies, or with 6 different founders or internal projects to get them up and running. When I look back, I would say 4 of the things that we worked on have since become something, but did not hit when we were working on it. And it's interesting because I'm like, the guy I worked with, he was so visionary, really and truly. Like, very forward looking, could see opportunities in the market, had a great idea, got the ball rolling. And then it's like, oh, we're 5 years too early. It's kind of like, okay, this thing ran out of steam. Makes sense to move on. And 5-8 years later, I look around in Indy and I'm like, oh, those were the plans that I worked on. Somebody else saw that. Because, they were aware of us, and we put our stuff out there pretty publicly. And now it's a thing, which is amazing. Like, on one hand, I'm like, dang it, why didn't it work for us? We just weren't, the market wasn't ready for it, but it's ready now. And it's a thing that I get to, go to and enjoy and use and whatever. And there were literally like 4 to 6 different examples of that, which just shows great ideas. I thought we executed pretty well, but doesn't really matter if the surrounding environment isn't ready to take it on. So if you don't have timing on your side, it really sucks. You either have to be patient enough and wait and have enough capital to wait around long enough to make it fit, or, look back in 10 years and say, oh, it's a thing now. I'm sad I wasn't the one to get to do it, but cool that we knew it was coming.
Right. And I think there's so many important points there, and kind of starting more towards the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've gotten to the point, maybe it's just like the specific people that I follow online and the networks and whatnot, but I feel like we so often glamorize this idea of entrepreneurship without highlighting the difficulties of it enough. Mm-hmm. And I am very much we need to represent this in a way that's accurate, not seeing it all through rose-colored glasses, because to your point, there's more than just you involved when you're starting this out. And I love the story about being so open about, I don't feel comfortable taking this money on, because when you think about it, that you're just bringing more people into this web, and mm-hmm. it's more people that you're responsible to, whether it's paying people's paychecks, returning the money that they gave you with the trust that you're going to make something of it and give them that money back and hopefully more. So yep. I think even just that, and then like the timing wise, and just so many different responsibilities that go in, that I think we need to be a little bit more realistic about. And I've definitely changed my perspective on it since working at a startup too. Onramp is the first one I've worked at. I was at like a big corporation before, so it's like night and day. And I always thought maybe I'd like to start something. But to your point, there's so much that goes into it that no one even considers sometimes when they think mm-hmm. about these things. And it's not that they can't do it or that they shouldn't, but it's also just being realistic about it, I think, is super important. And you have to be pretty much relentless. And the endurance part that you mentioned is key too, because you just get absolutely beat down, whether it's fundraising, whether it's managing people, whether it's hiring, whether it's having issues with product launch and rollouts and partnerships. There's so many different things that impact it that you might not think of off the bat. Even if it's a great idea and the timing is there, there's still so many hurdles, which explains the number of startups that either don't get funding or just completely fall off at some point. Yeah. And so if you are going to start something, I think one, you need to go into it knowing the risks, like be realistic about the stats that are out there about, how likely is it that this thing is going to hit or not, which whatever, maybe you can also, a lot of people make their own destiny, right? They figure out a way to slog it through. They figure out a way to make it work, which is wonderful. Like, we need that, just as long as or recognize the sacrifice and the time that it's going to take. And you don't get lured into kind of like the social network vision of what starting a company is. Because a lot of people are performative entrepreneurs in the sense that they're like, oh, starting a business is so sexy. Like, I get to be whatever, head of whatever this thing is, and an entrepreneur, and I started my own thing, and glitz and glam. No, like true founders are like not really glitz and glammy, right? Because it's you have to be in and get stuff done. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't have time to be flexing all of that. And I feel like people love the title CEO and they throw it everywhere. Like, I started a lemonade stand outside of my parents' house and I'm a CEO of this business, right? Like, we love that. That's a huge thing these days. I'm a founder, I'm a CEO. And there's so much responsibility that goes with that I think we all love to think that we're above average in the fact that we can handle things, or that we have the smarts or have the network or have the endurance. And it's like, realistically, most of us are at average or below average. Like there's a reason that an average is an average. And most of us are probably around that level for most things. Not to say that if you're listening to this, that you can't be above average in certain things, but it's also just be realistic about it. Know why you're doing what you're doing. Yes. Again, like you said, go in understanding the risks, which we love to say that we do. And I think that also related to like crypto and investing and stuff, right? Like we think we know what our risk tolerance is until that risk hits. And then it's just a totally different ball game than
emotions are real
most of the time. So I love that point. And I think there's so many different things we could talk about with timing and whatnot too. But maybe we move a little bit forward here too. Because another thing I want to talk about, and I think this is super important, and it's not as like sexy, right? But I think it's critical for anyone listening to this. So Ashton is a product manager. That is a role that I can say with 100% certainty I never knew was a job until just like working at a startup. Like I maybe had heard of it passively on Twitter, like as with many other things, but I never realized that pretty much any startup that's building anything, any company that's building anything needs product managers. And it's such a huge opportunity for people who have that skill set. So maybe if you could just walk through like, first of all, I know you talked a bit about your history of how you got into it, but maybe just an overview of what it is for people, because I think we hear it thrown around all the time, but logistically speaking, I know tons of people that probably would have been, not tons, but definitely a group of people who would have been really successful in that role, but I bet they didn't even know that it was out there. So the more that we shine light on those things, I think the better for everyone listening.
Yeah. Well, there's about 1,000 different directions I could go with this. Because one thing, like product managers typically do a lot of similar things from company to company, but just like anything, the specifics of it are going to depend on the company and how they kind of split up responsibilities. So, obviously this lens is from my experience and the way that I've done it at 3+ ish different startups. I think I'll talk about that in a second, but I think, there is an awareness problem for the role. Like you said, you didn't know what it was. You didn't even know it existed. I didn't know it existed until I was leaving my first job. And I was like, what are all these things that I do called? Like, how do I say this on a resume and like fit it into a specific role? Because I think this is changing a little bit now, but like historically, there haven't been programs or classes at universities that talk about product management as part of business. That may be changing. I feel like I was at a seminar somewhere that talked about, there's starting to be classes for it, but like historically there hasn't been. And a lot of people just get into product management kind of randomly because once they're in a company, they see it as a need and they find it interesting and they have the skill set, right? So it's like people can come from engineering backgrounds and technical backgrounds. People can come from more, like marketing or strategy or analyst backgrounds to fill in the role. Because really, you have to have a combination of a lot of different skill sets. Because you are most likely working with every functional area of the business, plus interfacing with current customers or prospective customers, whether those are B2B users or like consumer B2C companies where you're talking with kind of regular people. So because of that, you need to you don't have to be super technical necessarily, depending on the role, but you need to be able to have some sort of technical chops because you're going to be interfacing with engineers daily. Like those are your people. They need to be your best friends and they need to be able to trust and respect you. And I think that is the biggest thing with working with engineers is they're your biggest asset, but that like their trust and respect must be earned. You're not just going to get it because you're in this role. They have to believe that you are thinking through the product, the decisions that are being made, that you have a reason for them, and that you have kind of a good definition of what needs to happen and why. And so if you can't speak at least a little bit technically or, understand technical documents when you're reading them, that kind of hurts that credibility a little bit. And I mean, I'm honest in those discussions. I'm like, listen, I read the API docs. These are all the endpoints I think we need and the data that I think we can get from them, how we put all that together. I'm not 100% sure. That's where you guys come in and I need your expertise. But like, I did the background work to say, this is what I think we need and how it should fit together and how that data should flow into XYZ type of thing. So technical skills are really important. Understanding or being able to take in different kinds of data from a lot of different sources and make sense of it is really important. And so that is quantitative data and qualitative data, right? Like if you have access to numbers, being able to understand what those numbers mean and how they apply to your decision-making process, or, how people are going to use the product, super important, but you have to also have to balance that with like softer feedback and how is a person going to experience this and what do they think they need? What do they think they want? What are they saying? What problem are we trying to solve? Like all of these questions that could lead to any different type of feedback or information. You have to take all of that and distill it into decisions. And so, you have to be creative. You have to be forward thinking and you have to be able to ask questions. Like that is one of the biggest keys to the job is like curious enough to ask questions about why and what and how, and not assuming that you always have the best answer. Like probably the couple hardest things about being a product manager are you usually will not have the answer, but you have to facilitate the conversations to try and get the answer. And you constantly basically have to put your work out there and say, what do you guys think about it? And get feedback on it and kind of risk being torn apart by, whether it's internal or external and people saying, yeah, no, this isn't it. And being like, okay, well, let's talk about why or what needs to be different or, whatever it is related to that project to kind of narrow down and understand what's actually going to be valuable for the product. So I know that was kind of rambling and all over the place. So I don't know if you want to dig into anything specific, but yeah, I mean, it's a ton of different skill sets. So
No, that was super helpful. And I think, and you weren't rambling, that made total sense. And I think you kind of cover some of the, things that you can't be afraid to do in a role like that, I guess, taking the sunny side of this, right? And I never having done this job just from observing, right? I think something super rewarding about being at a startup generally is being able to be a part of something that you're building. You really get input, you have input that really goes into something that's being formed right in front of your eyes, which is great. But specific to your role, I think that's even more so, right? Because to your point, you're building things out, you're building prototypes, you're working with engineers to get this product off the ground, and you're really, really boots on the ground in that entire process. So I think that that's just a really unique experience as well for anyone listening to this that's, even interested, even after this conversation, looking for different opportunities, open to new roles. Like, what would you say for, the more rewarding parts of the job, I guess, if you had to cover some of those?
Yeah, I think that is spot on. Like, I just really like being able to think strategically about what the product is and where it needs to go to either shape an industry or serve a user base, or hopefully both at the same time. But it's not about building a particular feature. It's about what are we trying to do? And how do we make that come to life? And so I love thinking through kind of the stages of the roadmap. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how does that break down into little chunks that we can work on to get there, and kind of like a stepwise approach. And so for me, being able to kind of like lay out that plan, obviously plans change all the time. So whatever, you have to hold it loosely, but to be able to lay out a plan and say, we did this thing. So cool. We can see people using it. We can see the impact that it has. Now let's go do this next thing and get this step closer to where we ultimately want to be. Is so awesome to see those things come to life. And really why I wanted to get back into product instead of product marketing is because I was like, it's fun to talk about these and it's fun to like cast the vision, but I want to be the one who is at least in part deciding what we're doing, because of what I see as the opportunity for this thing. And like I said, it is 100% not all on you. It is a very collaborative thing. And so, you suggest these things, then people say yes or no as if those are the right projects and priorities or not. But more often than not, for me, setting the strategy and then seeing it come to life is the really exciting thing. And then I think in addition to that, it is really kind of working throughout the company and getting to know a lot of different people really well, and being able to celebrate their successes in different ways. So as a product manager, you are really not directly responsible for a lot of things, depending. Again, this is something that's different in every company. Like some companies will measure things very specifically to the product manager. Some places won't. But you typically do not directly, unless you are like a director who manages other product managers, you typically do not manage a team, at least a building team. And so you're an individual contributor. And so you have to work with and through people to get your work done, which means you have to be very effective at communication and collaboration and like helping empower people, and not in a manipulative way, but like winning them over to wanting to work on your thing. And part of that is making them feel appreciated, right? Like when I say that like engineers are your best friend, you should really be like lockstep with them as much as possible. And when they do awesome things, celebrate it publicly, because they're the people building, and like I could never do that. And so it's amazing to me when they can make something out of nothing. And so even if it's just like little checkpoints along the way, making them feel recognized and valued, to me is a rewarding part of it. Like for me too, even though I'm the one that's giving the praise, it's really cool to be able to kind of like pump them up and give them more visibility, because even though they should get all of the like accolades for the things being built because they're the ones that did it, they're not always the most visible people. So yeah, I try to shine the spotlight on them more than they might otherwise get it.
They deserve the world. And to your point, I think so much of the time they're very heads down, build, like worker bee type of style, but they're doing such incredible work, and they don't get that external visibility that someone who does other roles might get, but they still obviously deserve all of that praise, right? They're building something out of nothing. And every time that we have a demo with our engineers, I'm just kind of mind blown, because I could never do what they do. And sometimes before you were around and can speak that more technical language, when I was having calls with engineers, I literally a different language. And you get such an appreciation for that, because it's such an art form, like what they're doing. And you don't think about that all the time. You just see the end product and don't always know what goes into it. So I love that. But I do want to switch gears again, because all of the fun things we're covering today, and you and I are both came to Onramp from different backgrounds, right? Like this is my first time at a startup. This is where I learned about crypto. You came from startups. This is your first time in like more on like the finance side of things, right? Working with RIAs and whatnot. Also learning about crypto, had been learning about it a bit before, I believe too, right? So yep. One thing I want to talk about is you've definitely, I don't know if I just don't have like an addictive personality. I kind of need to do some self-assessment here, because I have a very hard time doing this for whatever reason. And it's not because I'm not interested, I am, but I don't often fall down rabbit holes like a lot of people do. Like I was just talking to a friend last night, and he's like, oh man, I was up till 3 last night looking up these different layer 2 solution. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you do that? So, and I know that you've fallen down the rabbit hole when it comes to DeFi and specifically NFTs. So I'm curious to hear, I mean, a lot of people are just learning about crypto now. So maybe like that origin story on how you got started, but also you've been doing a lot of fun stuff in the NFT space too. And I know because we talk about it all the time. So I'd love to go through that a bit as well.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 parts to that. One is how I got into crypto in the first place. And on one hand, it's like makes you want to cry a little bit. On the other hand, I've kind of gotten over it and made my peace with it. But I actually bought Bitcoin in like 2014 or 15 ish. So like really early, like my dad had heard about it. We started talking about it. I think it was probably more like 15. And we 100% did not understand it, but grasped, oh, this is a really interesting opportunity. Let's just throw some money in it and see where it goes, you know? So we threw some money in a Coinbase account, got like 3 Bitcoin, and just like let it sit there for a while. And then after I left the startup that I helped found, but before I got my job at Xylo, I was like in between for a little bit. And it was just like, oh, it would be really great to have this money so that I could pay my student loans. Fun. And so we sold them, and it was like flat at that point. You know, I'd held them, they had gone up and then back down, and then kind of reached the same entry point that we got in. So, you know, didn't sell for any profit or anything. And then it's just like looking back, it's like,
that's got to stay. Everyone has that story, I feel like, too, that started out in crypto a while ago. Like, oh, I sold, I lost my hardware wallet, or, you know.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of early people like have that same story. And the only like way that I've been able to make my peace with it is I'm like, listen, I would have sold 500 times over like before it got to 60,000. So like, let's not kid ourselves here. Like, you know, I wouldn't have had $180,000. Like, no, I would have sold at probably like a $200 profit the first time anyway. So whatever. So all that being said, like, I had an awareness of it, you know, probably start then in the 2017 when I was at the SaaS management company, sitting in the back with the engineers talking about crypto kitties. Did we call them NFTs? No, not at all. It was just this thing, and everybody knows that I like cats, so it was like kind of a joke. They're like, Ashton, you should buy some crypto kitties, blah blah blah. So of course we're all back there like picking out the ones that we would get. This guy comes back from Christmas break and was like, yeah, me and my brother-in-law spent like $500 on some kitties. And we were all like, what? That's the dumbest thing you can do. What are you going to do with them? And he's like, I don't know. We just did it. So I don't know whatever happened to those, but like, it's interesting to look back and think, oh, that's what that thing was. And we had no idea. So since then it was just, you know, a little bit more learning, throwing some money in, building up the investments. And I'm definitely not a trader. I'm a long-term type of person. So it's like buying some Bitcoin, buying some ETH, just stacking the sats, gonna see where it goes over the long term. Holding on to them and building up that little base. But in terms of NFTs, like, honestly, I didn't really get it either. I'm like, how are these things selling for so much money? Like, why? What are people doing with them? And at the end of last year, I was kind of like, I just want to set some money aside to play around and learn about stuff, because the best way to learn about stuff is doing it. So I set a few $1,000s aside, and I didn't really have any projects that I necessarily wanted to get into, but one day, you know, looking on Instagram, before I got back on Twitter, this is so funny, but Justin Bieber posted about how his artist for his clothing label was doing an NFT project. There are these little bears called In-Betweeners. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like, I didn't even realize that I was assessing it on certain kind of like guardrails or guidelines, but I was like, okay, well, this art, like, we know who the artist is. We know what the artist's bio is. We know what kind of projects he's worked on before. We know that Justin Bieber is bought in to this project and will be kind of like a marketing arm for it, for awareness. And so a lot of people who are not even in crypto will be attracted to it because Bieber's part of it. So it seems like there will be a good community around it. That is like interesting enough for me to like for this to be my first one, my first mint, like it wasn't even out yet. So it wasn't like a secondary sale or anything. My first one was a random mint. And so I was just kind of like, I think this could be something over the long term. We'll see where it goes. So I minted a bear, thought I got rugged. It was like such a roller coaster because, at least for this one, you minted it and then the reveal was on a certain day and they were going to reveal it on Christmas. And so it was like your little pre-mint thing he was in like a Christmas package with like lights on him. Then they were going to release them at a certain time on Christmas. And I was like, cool, I will wake up and my bear will be there and it'll be like my first present. I like open up my OpenSea app and he's still the lights bear. And it's like, the link is like, do not buy this link. And I'm like, what happened? Long story short, something happened with the contract. So they switched contracts. So then they were going to airdrop people their bears like in a different place or whatever. So it showed up. He ultimately showed up, but I was like this roller coaster of, I just wasted all this money. What am I even doing? Like first time trying and it's such a fail. No, it turned out great. My bears didn't like him at first, but I'm attached to him now. He's super cute. He has a couple rare traits. And so that was kind of like the first little bug where I was like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know that I could like kind of like, this is exciting. I didn't know I could feel like a little attachment to this thing. What am I going to do with him? I have no idea, but we'll see where it goes. And then it was just kind of like, I became more aware of more projects. And the advice that I got was like, buy things that you like. Like, yeah, hopefully it does something, but if it doesn't, then at least you like the art that you bought. So that's how I got into the second project, which is Sad Girls Bar.
A vibe.
Girl.
Oh man, there she
case.
is.
Yeah, like so much attitude. So yeah, just kind of like snowballed from there a little bit. There have been some projects that I've gotten into because again, I think the team has the ability to make something out of it. So I have a couple just like sitting that I want to ultimately flip, and not because they're like not cute. Didn't actually like those ones, but hopefully they'll make some money at someday. And if they don't, okay, fine, I learned. But then some others, I'm like, wow, this art is really cool, and I want to get a little bit more. Like perfect example, my Sad Girl. You can, they have Skeletons, which are like the boy version, and then they have Sad Cats, which are the cat version. And if you get all three of them, then they will mint you a super NFT of your sad family. So it's like, it's kind of funny how it just kind of snowballs and you get attached to things.
Well, let's go through some jargon for the people here, right? So you hit some main ones for like how to buy NFTs and things. Yes. You mentioned minting versus secondary. So maybe like that, let's hit that. And then maybe we can hit some others after that. But just for the people who are unfamiliar with them, let's go through some vocab for them here.
Yeah. So these are not going to be super technical, just definitions. Just the way that I'll like explain them to the best of my knowledge. So for minting, that basically means that the project team has set up a site where you buy kind of like the first version of it. And I don't know if this happens all the time or just some of the time, but you might not find out what one you get immediately, right? Like you can't choose anything about it. You can't see what you're minting. Like you click the button and the thing randomly for like multi-generative projects, you can't see anything. And it's like randomized and you just get what you get and you don't throw a fit, as my family would say when I was little. And so it'll be revealed later and you'll see those traits. Of course you can mint projects where you do know what the thing is. Like they'll have buy these things first time you buy it or first time somebody buys it, click the button and that's the thing that you get. So it's not always random. In terms of like secondary sales, it means somebody else has already minted it and you can buy it from them on like a different platform. So like OpenSea or LooksRare. I don't know where else. Those are the main ones I know about. but it's kind of like it's secondary, right? Like not the first purchase, buying it from somebody else and you know what you're getting.
Right. And then rugged, I guess we just say, right, like projects that people put their money into that are more of a cash grab, right? Where you're like expecting something and you're like, wait, I don't know if it's like a where's my NFT per se, but it's more of just like there's not really like a community aspect to it after the initial mint. They just sort of take the money and run, which I mean, in any situation where there's something new and unfamiliar, you're always going to see people taking advantage of that. That's not crypto specific. That's just life, which is unfortunate. So that's why, we don't have time to go through it today, but that's the importance of, doing your research, looking into the community. To your point with the first NFT project that you got involved with, right? Like, where is the community coming from? Who's involved in it? Are there credible people that are being involved in this project that you could kind of put a little weight behind in that respect? So there's a lot of stuff to look into. And for a lot of people, I have tons of friends that love the NFT market. I haven't gotten into it very deep myself, but I mean, there's some really interesting, more interactive projects that are ongoing, not just like you buy your piece and you're done either. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. But do you imagine that this will continue to be a real big thing, or do you see this being, sort of a bubble with the prices we're at right now, dies off a bit, but there's still a lot of like value, in the underlying? And I just kind of push my own opinion on that, but
I mean, I think both, right? Like we're just at the start of what NFTs are and can do, or will do in the future. And right now we are, I think, in the art phase and collector phase, which, overvalued or not, who's to say? Like, if people say there's value to something, then there's value to something. It's just about, what people, that people agree to an ascribed value. But I think whatever, bubble or not, I think some element of that will stay around long term, because art is art, right? It's literally just a new kind of medium for spreading art and people kind of enjoying other people's creations. But I think from a utility side is where a lot of the growth is going to come from in the future. And honestly, like, I'm not educated on the space enough to say what that's going to look like, but I think some interesting examples right now that I know we've talked about before. One, I think, so one is like NFTs that allow you access to things. And so, I know for in-betweeners, for example, they've talked about if you hold a bear, then being able to get Justin Bieber concert tickets on a pre-sale date, or like be on the floor, or like access to certain events or concerts or art shows or things like that. So it can kind of serve as a ticket to entry for essentially a special club or a special community. On the other hand, it can show not lead to access, but you can get it because you were at a place or participated in a thing. And so whether that is a POAP for proof of attendance for attending a certain event, kind of like a relic of I was here, or I got the education type of thing. I know there have also been things in the news recently, and I think it was for the Super Bowl. I can't 100% remember, but like, going to an athletic event and getting an NFT as part of your ticket sale to like show you were at that thing. So those are like kind of very ground level applications of utility, but I think sky's the limit for what it'll actually enable you to do on chain and in the metaverse and all of these other places. Like, who knows? People are creative. They'll do some wacky stuff, but I think that'll be kind of like a vehicle to that access and functionality in the future.
Agreed. And builders going to build, man. They're still going. There's a lot going on in that space. It's really cool to follow. So I always love talking to you about that, because you're definitely a little bit more tapped in on that than I've been. So thank you there. We're gonna wrap up here, but I always ask our followers or our guests the same question at the end, which is very simple. But when you're not being a product manager and when you're not, aping into NFTs, as the kids say these days, what do you like to do? Like, what are your favorite things? What makes you tick outside of work?
Yeah. So, fitness is a big thing for me. So I do a lifting program pretty much every day. I love being in the gym and just staying active. as a good balance to that, I also really love baking and drinking wine and trying new wines. So all of these things, like, it's helpful to have both sides, right? So yeah, experimenting in the kitchen, trying wines from all over the world. And then ultimately, like, the best expression of that is actually traveling to the places, that, different wine regions that I'm interested in, and kind of experiencing the local culture, the local dishes, and how those wines both pair from that plate with food from that place, but also why those wines are a result of that place's unique environment. So yeah, fitness, food, travel, those are the main things, which is like maybe pretty basic, but like, whatever, it's what I like.
Those are the foundational things, baby. Those are the good stuff, So I'm on board with that. So I'm here for any wine recommendations that you have at any point, which I know you've shared. So grateful for your hobbies for this, but also Ashton likes to get outside, because we are, at the time of this recording, going to Salt Lake City next week, as well as Denver. Going to get outside together. First time I get to meet Ashton, which is kind of funny how life works that way when we're working in a remote world, but pumped for that. Going to meet a bunch of crypto folks as well. So it'll be a really good time, but want to thank you for taking an hour out of the day. I know what you're building, so I appreciate the time, because we do work together, and this was fantastic. Hopefully, people have some good takeaways, whether it's, product management, working with startups, the whole deal. We covered a lot, NFTs. So perfect. So thank you there. This was fantastic again, but where can people follow you at to kind of follow along with your musings? I'm glad that we got you back on Twitter, but maybe if you just give their usernames there.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun to just chat about all of this stuff. In terms of a following on Twitter, it's just my name, Ashton Chaffee. If you can't see it written out, that's ASHTONCHAFFEE. And then on Instagram, if you like wine, I have a wine account that's called the Wine MBA. Great. Because I got my master's. So Wine MBA. Yeah. Have fun in both places. And I guess the topics are kind of like split up based on those lines, right? Wine, we talk mostly about wine and travel. Twitter is kind of a grab bag, but mostly business stuff and crypto stuff.
I love it. Well, maybe we have some collab there with the cocktails and the wine on the Twitter feed here, but we'll see. All good content. Pick your poison, if you will. But yeah, thank you so much again. And thank you to everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with another recording.